is Bakhmut. 70,000 people used to live here. Now, it's a ghost town. More accurately, it's a pile of rubble. To say that Bakhmut has been destroyed would be an understatement. This city has been obliterated by Russian artillery, tanks, and small arms fire, having experienced more fighting than just about anywhere else in Ukraine following Putin's invasion in 2022. Russia has paid a high cost trying to capture this city. According to White House estimates, the Russian military has suffered no less than 100,000 casualties here, including both dead and injured, while also bearing a similarly high cost in terms of financial resources and military equipment, with Russia having sacrificed more soldiers here than Bakhmut ever had in population, and more money than Bakhmut's economy ever produced. This is obviously bad, but let's put that in perspective, because large numbers can quickly become meaningless. To demonstrate just how wasteful this battle has really been, Russia has lost more troops trying to capture this small Ukrainian city than the United States lost in the historic Battle of the Bulge, one of the most costly battles for the US of World War II, which resulted in more than 19,000 US troops killed and more than 80,000 wounded. The difference is, in the Battle of the Bulge, the sacrifice ultimately paid off, but the same cannot be said of Russia and Bakhmut. Their strategic gains in Bakhmut have been lackluster at best, and potentially devastating to the entire Russian war effort at worst. That's because if Russia managed to fully capture and hold Bakhmut, that would not mean they were out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. Just a few kilometers to the west, Ukraine has already set up defensive positions on hills that would be even easier for them to defend than Bakhmut has been, meaning that Russia has effectively sacrificed 100,000 troops just to earn the right to fight even harder and sacrifice even more somewhere else. A reality that must be especially discouraging for their soldiers, given the horrors they have already experienced in this battle, which would be difficult to overstate. During the past 5 months fighting for the city, the Russian and Ukrainian armies have found themselves stuck in a vicious gridlock, where soldiers have become locked in brutal combat, reminiscent of the combined horrors of the worst of World War I and the worst of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars at the same time, complete with trench warfare, endless artillery shelling, a no-man's zone filled with landmines, and terrifying house-to-house fighting, where you never know if an enemy is going to be around the next corner. Not to mention the addition of new modern technology, like drones and precision rockets, which can strike anywhere, at any time, with little to no warning. It's the kind of battle that doesn't just wear you down physically, but breaks you down mentally as well. A psychological hell where no soldier wants to go, and the kind of place from which many never mentally return, even if physically they manage to survive. You would think that for Russia to force their soldiers to make these kinds of sacrifices, Bakhmut must be a place of pivotal strategic importance to their war effort, and that would only make sense, especially if Russia cared about their troops as much as Vladimir Putin claims it does. But the truth is, this is probably not the case, because despite the fact that Putin, his generals, and the Russian media machine have treated Bakhmut as if it were the single most important military objective of the century, the reality is that expert military analysts, including NATO chiefs and representatives from the Pentagon, have downplayed Bakhmut's strategic importance, with many experts who comment on the situation struggling to comprehend why, from a military perspective, Russia decided to keep the pressure on. It's not to say that Bakhmut has no strategic importance at all. Nobody is saying this because capturing Bakhmut would, in fact, provide some benefit for Russia. For one, Bakhmut is, or at least was, a regional transport and logistics hub, which could be used to help supply the Russian troops along the front line. And more than that, Bakhmut's location could help to provide an important springboard for Russia as it tried to capture 2 other cities in the region, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, which were an important part of Russia's originally stated goals for the invasion. So, the strategic value is there, potentially. But what is really puzzling to the experts here is not the existence of strategic value, but the cost at which that value has been pursued. Because any strategic benefit that could come from capturing Bakhmut has been far outweighed by the cost that Russia has invested trying to obtain it. To put it in simpler terms, Russia's actions here were like paying $1 million to build the nicest, most extravagant garage in the world, whose only purpose was to protect a $30,000 car from potential theft or bad weather, and then beating your chest in victory as if you had done a great thing, when in reality, you could have just bought more than 30 of those cars for the same price without having to even go to the trouble of the garage. or just insured the car against theft and damage for pennies on the dollar. But then again, you can put your name on that garage, and other people will see it years from now and think, wow, what a nice garage. The person who built this must have been really important. There's that. When you control the media and the history books, perception is everything, and costs, they can simply be swept under the rug. This might seem exaggerated or silly, but in reality, it is almost exactly what Russia's politicians have done every time they gain a small victory in Ukraine at a massive cost to their own nation, pounding their chests as if they have accomplished a great victory over the West, a victory that they inevitably portray as having nearly unlimited value, when, in reality, they could have gotten more real benefits for Russia by simply doing nothing, or, at the very least, cutting their losses when the cost became greater than the potential benefit. With 100,000 men of fighting age, and the financial resources given to the military campaign in Bakhmut, Russia could have done something truly extraordinary for their country. For example, they might even have been able to finally build a functional highway system across more of Siberia, one that was actually fully paved, and which didn't flood all the time, making it unusable for much of the year. Or maybe they could even have just fixed their existing roads, so that Russia didn't inadvertently subsidize the entire global rubber industry by blowing up excessive quantities of tires with its incessant potholes that make many important Russian roads practically useless. But then again, that one's not that likely, because if they got rid of those money-sucking holes, Russia's politicians might be the only ones left to point at. Russia could have even done something as simple as finally providing functional plumbing and electricity for more of its population, much of which still lives in third world conditions, and the list goes on and on. Heck, even spending $85 billion to fix just one Russian pothole would have been more valuable than this entire pointless war. But doing things like this that provide actual benefits to the Russian people, becoming the unifier of Siberia, or the savior of Russian tires, wallets, and rear ends, just doesn't ring as well in the history books as the great liberator of the persecuted Russian compatriots living in former Soviet territory. Even if, in the process of supposedly liberating those so-called compatriots, you just managed to destroy their entire city of 70,000 people and turn it into a pile of rubble. They were liberated all right. Liberated from their rights, their homes, their families, their identities, and their futures. But as far as Putin's concerned, if they're not happy about that, then so be it. All joking aside, Russia could have built a better life for its people, but instead chose to sacrifice the lives or futures of 100,000 of those same people in the trenches of Bakhmut, giving up many more men and resources to capture the city than they could ever hope to regain if they even managed to hold it. Which begs the question, why did Russia do this? What was their strategic goal? And what was the end game that caused them to push so hard for this single piece of territory? We've already discussed the potential strategic value of Bakhmut, and found it to not be worth the cost that has been paid. So now it's time to look at things from another angle, where we consider Bakhmut not from the perspective of its strategic value to Russia as a nation, but rather from the perspective of its strategic value to key Russian politicians, as a political play to increase or preserve their own personal power. Not surprisingly, it is here that things finally start to make sense. As we consider this, if you're enjoying this analysis, consider leaving a super thanks or becoming a channel member to help fund future videos and support our work. If you happen to live in Russia and were watching media coverage of this war, or as they call it over there, this special military operation, you would be likely to see a few different things. One would be Putin rambling on about the threat of NATO, just like your crazy old uncle does every Thursday evening at the family gathering. Another would be propaganda of the Russian government providing token gifts to the wives of fallen soldiers, who then obligingly express their gratitude to Putin that he let their men fall in his place, so that they don't risk going to prison for being negative about the campaign that their husbands pointlessly died in. Then you would hit a commercial break, where you would probably see a recruitment ad telling you that there was an opportunity to finally earn a living wage and provide for your family by going to war and fighting on the front line for Putin, with the added bonus that your wife too could have the opportunity to show up on state TV in just a few short weeks. Not months, because there's a good chance you'll miss basic training. which isn't needed when your only job is to run hopelessly at the enemy's front line in exchange for a bit of ribbon and tin. And last but not least would be the nightly coverage of the Battle for Bakhmut, which has been portrayed to the Russian people practically as if it were the only hope for national survival against the Western aggressors, who, ironically, Russia aggressively attacked. Indeed, more than anywhere else, Bakhmut has become a kind of rallying cry for the Russian media, mainly because, despite the heavy losses that have been incurred there, it is one of the only places where Russian forces have managed to make any kind of territorial gain at all over the past several months. As such, Russia takes an inch in Bakhmut, and the state media inevitably describes the gain as if it were 100 miles, even if that inch is subsequently lost the following day, an event that is, conveniently, left off of the state TV broadcasts. And there's a reason for this desperate focus on this grinding battle. After nearly a year with no strategic gains in Ukraine, Russia desperately needs a win. And even more desperate than Russia is Vladimir Putin. Since the initial territorial gains following the invasion, Russia has largely been pushed back, and in their continued offensives, they have failed to capture other cities and towns along the front line over the course of the entire winter. Russia has sacrificed a lot for this war, and frankly, has not had a lot to show for it beyond the initial push, something which is becoming demoralizing for the troops, and for the nation as a whole, despite the fact that official state media doesn't allow them to show this. For Putin, this is potentially disastrous. Next year, election season will be beginning in Russia, and he has in no small way staked his entire reputation as president on his promise of victory in Ukraine, which he initially promoted as something not much different from a literal walk in the park, which, as it turns out, was actually a walk in a park riddled with barbed wire, landmines, drone strikes, and desperately positioned trenches. Because of this, Putin desperately needs a win to help him maintain his grip on power. And by surveying the battlefield, it is apparent that he has put all of his chips for this win on the small city of Bakhmut. But why has he put his focus here? Well, there's the logistical reason, and then there's the political one. Logistically, Bakhmut is a location on the Russian front line where several of their supply lines converge together, meaning that it is one of the easiest places for Russia to supply weapons and equipment to conduct attacks. Throughout the war, Russia has been hampered by extreme supply chain issues, where they can't seem to get enough weapons and equipment to the front line fast enough. This shows that the Russian front may have broken beyond the point where it can successfully supply a large-scale offensive, or an offensive in any area that lacks a plethora of potential supply routes. Since Bakhmut is one of the few places that has a plethora of supply routes, this means that Russia has few, and perhaps no places it can actually attack as effectively as it can here, meaning that however high the losses may be in Bakhmut, they would potentially be even higher if Russia attacked anywhere else with the same fervor. If this is true, the choice to focus on this city is not really a choice of long-term macro strategy, but rather a choice of temporary convenience, where Putin is focused on the one place he feels he can be sure of capturing before the elections next year. And speaking of the elections, there's also the political considerations, which add another aspect to this goal. When Putin originally invaded Ukraine, he had the goal of capturing the entire Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and, to his credit, he has captured much of them, but he can't yet say that he has gathered them completely under his control. To finalize this series of conquests, and to be able to say that he has captured all of the Donbass from Ukraine, Putin must capture Bakhmut, along with a handful of other cities where Bakhmut is a prerequisite to their invasion. Politically, if Putin were able to capture all of these objectives, he could save face by demonstrating that he is able to deliver on his promises. As the election season creeps up, this may explain why Putin is maniacally throwing more and more soldiers at the problem, as he is desperate to break through and achieve the goal before he runs out of time. For Putin, the loss of soldiers' lives can be explained away through vague references to the glory of the Russian state, a few patriotic ceremonies, and lump sum payments to the victims' families to get them to be quiet. An unfortunate loss, but for him, something that is tolerable, as long as it does not affect him personally. On the flip side, his inability to capture territory from what he has described as an inferior enemy could be potentially crippling to his own political future, which he has made dependent on his ability to stand up to and defeat the West. Because of this, there may be no limit to what Putin is willing to gamble. From one perspective, Putin has already experienced losses in Ukraine, and the backlash that has come with them, so further losses won't really hurt him much more politically than current losses already have. On the flip side, a political win, say a map showing a Russian flag over the entire Donbas region, would have great value to him, making this a morbid situation where Putin personally has a lot to gain and very little to lose by ordering wave after wave of soldiers to break against Ukraine's front line. While victory at this cost makes zero sense from a military perspective or from a national strategic perspective, it makes complete sense from the perspective of a crazed dictator desperate to hold on to his power for a few more years. These losses may not be rational, but then again, if war was rational, it wouldn't exist in the first place. The sad part for Russia is that if they would have just chosen to maintain their front lines, rather than desperately trying to capture Bakhmut to help Putin and his cronies save face, they could have accomplished most of their original objective to capture the Donbas region for just a fraction of the cost. But for Putin, most of the objective isn't enough to satisfy his pride or political goals. And for that extra sliver of Ukraine, for that extra dot on the map, which, even if won, will be little more than a completely devastated battlefield of artillery shells and rubble, there seems to be no limit to the number of Russian lives he is willing to throw at the problem. So Putin's political goals help us to understand the situation in Bakhmut, but let's not pretend for a minute that Putin is the only one with something to gain from all of this. Because aside from protecting Putin's reputation, there is at least one more Russian who has a lot to gain if Bakhmut falls into Russian hands. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the infamous billionaire Russian mercenary leader of the Wagner Group, a publicity-hungry tyrant who has staked no small part of his own reputation on capturing the city for Vladimir Putin. Prigozhin has a lot to profit, politically and monetarily, from the increased status that will come to him if he gets the credit for the victory in this area. According to many Russian generals, the battle has already been a great boon for his reputation, with one Russian officer becoming so jealous of Prigozhin that he actually ordered his soldiers to fire on the Wagner Group in a drunken rage. A brief incident of Russian civil war that may help outsiders understand the reality of Russian politics and the petty jealousy that often drives their actions, as much as, or even more than, rational thinking does. According to some, Prigozhin has his eyes on future political positions in Russia. According to others, he simply enjoys the money he's able to make off of his mercenary group. But in either case, his ability to capture Bakhmut will play a big role in his future, mainly because he must show that the Wagner Group can consistently deliver wins if he wants to stay in favor with the Russian government and earn future lucrative contracts. And to deliver these wins and keep business rolling in, Prigozhin is apparently more than willing to cut a few corners, even if it means deceiving prisoners into joining his mercenary group, using them as meat shields to charge the front line, and hiding their deaths from their family members to avoid making timely compensation payments. You see, joining the Wagner Group isn't exactly what you would call a safe job. According to estimates, of the 50,000 Wagner Group fighters sent to Ukraine, it's thought that 30,000 of them, or 60%, have been killed or injured. And this is an estimate that may actually be drastically lower than reality, as it was made at a time when the US believed the Wagner Group had suffered a combined total of just 14,000 casualties killed or injured in Bakhmut, while since then, Prigozhin himself has admitted that more than 20,000 of his soldiers died there, not even to mention the injuries. Bluntly stated, Russia is losing men so quickly that even the high end of the casualty estimates become outdated almost the moment they are written down. This high casualty rate isn't actually surprising. The entire reason the Wagner Group is in the area in the first place is basically to wear down Ukrainian defenses by sending wave after wave of men into dangerous territory to soften it for future advances by the more conventional Russian soldiers. And this zombie wave style invasion isn't exactly a task that most normal people are raising their hands to sign up for. So, to fill its ranks, fulfill its mission, and fill its leader's pocketbook, the Wagner Group has resorted to recruiting from one of the only places it can find men desperate enough to join them: Russian prisons, where prisoners are offered to exchange their lengthy prison sentences for just 6 months of fighting for Wagner, with many reportedly being told that they will be working in rear areas, far from the front line. As it turns out, working far from the front line is a matter of perspective. I guess in Russian, the word for rear area must actually mean in the middle of the fighting, and the word for far must actually mean 5 feet. And if you're not happy with that interpretation of your contract, then so be it. Let's not neglect to mention that this is all done with just a month or so of training, because apparently there's no sense in training new Wagner fighters longer than this, since the plan is just to send them running at the front line anyways. After this is all said and done, Wagner troops must then endure one final scam, the one where Wagner does everything in its power to avoid paying its promised $71,000 restitution to the families of fallen fighters. Wagner apparently has a policy of no body, no payment, meaning that families cannot collect restitution payments unless they can provide the body of the fallen soldier as proof. So when men fall and die in areas where it is too dangerous to retrieve them, as is often the case given Wagner's dangerous mission, their families are simply out of luck. Unless, as some families have actually done, they go to Ukraine and negotiate to retrieve the body themselves. But this is assuming that the family is even notified of the death in the first place, which apparently can't be taken for granted, as, according to some reports, Wagner is even going to great lengths to keep the deaths of its fighters secret, burying them in special, private cemeteries, and often not even telling their family members that they have fallen. This lack of dignity and value for soldiers may explain the final reason why Russia was willing to sacrifice so many men in their attempt to capture Bakhmut. And that is for the simple reason that Russia does not actually care about these men, especially those that it can write off as expendable prisoners. In a morbid twist, some have speculated that Vladimir Putin may actually be using these deaths to hide the true cost of the war from the Russian people, since every prisoner that dies on the front line serves to lower Russian prison expenditures. Russia throws prisoners at the Ukrainian front, absorbing munitions that would otherwise be spent on regular soldiers, and frees itself of the burden for paying for those prisoners all at the same time. A barbarous, completely twisted win-win for Putin. And the scariest part is that this logic could also apply to any other undesirables that Putin decides to conscript into the army, allowing him to eliminate his opponents without having to issue the death penalty himself. This is the barbarous nature of the war that the world finds itself in. After all this, some will still ask, why has Russia sacrificed 100,000 men to capture Bakhmut? But given all these details, the question is, do you really expect a logical answer? After all, if mere logic was being employed, the war would never have been started in the first place. As you can imagine, I receive a lot of critical comments on my videos, but I do not delete those comments because I believe strongly in the importance of all forms of media being open to examination and criticism, including myself. Unfortunately, the level of critical feedback provided by YouTube comments can be something that is very hard to find with traditional media. But one thing that helps is a platform called Ground News, which I've been using throughout the war in Ukraine to compare news coverage and arrive at a more balanced perspective. Ground News makes it easy to analyze current events by providing quick visual breakdowns of news stories and allowing me to do things like quickly compare headlines from different articles covering the same story to see how differences in language can be used to shape my understanding of breaking news events around the world. When conducting my research for a video, I also like to use Ground News to analyze topics and look for potential bias. Like here, where I can see that this topic is heavily reported on by the right, with far less media coverage on the left. Or here, where I see the exact opposite situation. And what I really love about Ground News is that if I sense potential bias and want to dive deeper, they make it easy to see the actual owners of different news organizations, meaning that you can always know who has a potential profit motive or vested interest behind their reporting, bringing a whole new level of transparency to the media that our world desperately needs. Perhaps most importantly of all, Ground News makes it easier to find common ground, helping me to appreciate different viewpoints and experiences that help reduce the effects of media polarization. If you want to try this out for yourself and become a smarter news consumer, while also making reading the news easier and more enjoyable, you can get started today and subscribe through my link at ground.news/Icarus for a limited time offer of 30% off their Vantage plan. You can benefit from unlimited access for as little as $5 per month, which helps support our channel and brings us closer to the truth by making it easier to read between the lines of media bias and break free from algorithms. Thank you to Ground News for being the sponsor of today's video. And don't forget that you can always leave a super thanks or become a channel member to help support our work. If you enjoyed this video, you'll probably enjoy these other ones as well. See you on the next one.